Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman. And this is Global Insight. It was during this month in 2011 that pro-democracy demonstrations began in Syria. A decade on, 380,000 Syrians have been killed, refugees have been displaced worldwide, and the fighting continues. Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
I think that I recall that the Syrian conflict was the first modern civil war that was caused, at least in part, by climate change. How did it start, and why has it dragged on for a decade?
Climate change may well have contributed to the problem. As I understand it, severe drought compounded by climate change led to many farmers abandoning their crops and moving towards Syrian cities. But I think that probably added fuel to an already smouldering situation. The Bashar Assad regime was not immune to the currents of unrest that were sweeping the Arab world during that period. It started in Tunisia, it spread to Egypt and a number of other Arab countries, including Syria, by 2011. And the real spark was a series of peaceful protests by Syrian citizens against the very tough rule or oppressive rule Bashar Assad's dictatorship has in that country, and the regime responded by shooting dead the peaceful protesters. That went on for about 3 months before, most inevitably, the protesters got the message that it wasn't safe to protest peacefully, and they took up arms. And we've had a civil war ever since, unfortunately.
So how has this Syrian crisis affected the world?
Enormously. We've had, as you mentioned in your remarks, there's been huge, half the population of Syria, a country of about 23 million people, has been displaced. Either they've had to be moved internally because of the dislocation caused by civil war. I mean, the country has been reduced largely to rubble, which is a tragedy for the country, and it's very difficult to see how we can recover from this easily. The economic damage alone is in excess of $1 trillion. But you've got 7 million people within Syria having to move from their homes, but you've also had something close to around about 5 million who've had to leave the country. Something like 3.5 million Syrians are now in camps in Turkey, and you have Germany accepted about 1 million Syrian refugees in 2016, and New Zealand in Dunedin has absorbed 545 Syrian refugees. So this was near civil war, but it has global ramifications. The exodus from Syria, that's added to an already burgeoning refugee problem. At the moment, at the time I speak to you, Bruce, there's more than 60 million people who classified as refugees, and the Syrian issue has exacerbated it. And the influx of Syrians into other countries has also fueled national populism. It's enabled populists to point to people who have different culture, different appearance, and suggest that they are a cause of other problems. So it's probably the fact that Syria has not been dealt with by the international community has led to the problem spreading out of Syria and causing political and diplomatic problems elsewhere.
You say the international community hasn't been involved, but Turkey and Russia have played a role in recent times, haven't they? Where are things up to?
I didn't say they weren't involved. I said they were not solving the problem. I'm sorry if I didn't make myself clear on that. Russia has played a critical role, and it should be remembered that although the Obama administration was slow to respond to the brutal killing of unarmed protesters between March 2011 and June 2011, by June 2011, the Obama administration came off the fence and supported the protesters and said the Assad regime should stand down to facilitate reconciliation and some sort of new governance system for Syria, which would end the civil war. In fact, the Obama administration tabled 3 resolutions in the UN Security Council between 2011 and 2012, but each of those resolutions were frustratingly vetoed by Russia and China. And the thing that was really frustrating about this is that more than 160 countries in the General Assembly, including many Arab countries, supported the American initiative to bring a peaceful settlement to the civil war. So, in a sense, Russia and China satisfied their national interest by blocking a peaceful settlement, but the cost of doing that has been colossal in global terms.
And Russia, under Vladimir Putin, has played a decisive military role in Syria. But at the same time, I mean, often we look at Russia as a bad player. What about the United States and its involvement? Are its hands clean in this region, in the Middle East and North Africa?
No. But just to emphasise the Russian role, it's been critical. Assad's regime has survived because of external support. Russia has been a key player in that support. Iran has been another one. So Russia has supported the Assad regime because it had a working relationship with that regime for many years. And remember, Assad's father was in power before him. And the Russia connection goes back to the Soviet era. And also Russia has several military bases in that country. So when they blocked or vetoed the resolutions to bring about a peaceful settlement, it was because they feared that they may lose the sort of access they previously enjoyed in that country in what they consider to be a strategic region, and Mr. Putin has great power ambitions. Iran has played a key role also, although for different, not for strategic reasons so much, but for, I would say, diplomatic and political reasons. And for Iran, there's a Shia connection because the Alawite regime is related to the Shia. So, in a sense, these are some of the reasons. But coming back to the United States, it certainly does not have clean hands. You could argue that the US intervention, or rather invasion of Iraq in 2003 set in motion consequences that led to the Syrian civil war because it certainly contributed to it because it destabilized a very important country in the Middle East, Iraq, which inflated the role of Iran, enabled Iran to play a key role when the unrest in Syria broke out. But in addition, by disbanding the army in Iraq, there was a group of disgruntled Sunni officers who formed the nucleus of a group which became Islamic State, an Islamic State. So the United States indirectly consequences to the rise of Islamic State, which became a major problem and which Mr. Obama had to deal with by 2014, establishing an anti-Islamic State coalition consisting of 65 countries, including New Zealand.
Should the United Nations have played a more active role in stopping outside players having a role in Syria's domestic affairs? And for that matter, what role has the UN played in all of this?
Unfortunately, the UN Security Council, we often use the term UN, but it's the UN Security Council, which is the key decision-making body, has behaved quite disgracefully during this conflict. And I think the fact that this war has gone on for 10 years with the UN Security Council largely reduced to a bystander with more than, you mentioned 380,000 deaths. In fact, there's probably a conservative estimate, Bruce. The estimate is probably in excess of 400,000. And the world has largely looked on. You could say, well, why has this civil war gone on for so long? Well, but there's been no international machinery is in place to stop it. Because while we have great powers which can block anything they don't like in the United Nations, other Syrias will continue to happen. But Syria, I think, is testament and, if you like, an indicator of the urgent need to reform the United Nations so it can perform the role that was envisaged for it by its founders, which is to safeguard international peace and security. At the moment, it's totally incapable of doing that, and Syria is testimony to its impotence.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Ka kite anō.